Good morning, everybody. My name is Oriana
Good
Chan.
morning.
And first, I would like to introduce Maria Howard. She's from First American, NHD Reports. Mr. John Wax, American West, NHD Reports. And Eric Spitz at my NHD. Let me put on my glasses so I can see. All right. The first question goes to Maria Howard. Who is actually legally responsible for the disclosing whether the property is one or more of the 6 zones?
Good morning, everybody. Out of the 6 requirements per the state of California, 4 of them the listing agent is responsible for. So you as listing agents, it is your responsibility to make sure that those disclosures are disclosed to the buyer. So you must get an NHD report. The other 2 are the high fire and the wildfire areas, and that is for your seller to disclose to the buyer. So you can see that the fault goes on you as listing agents to make sure that this information you're giving to your buyer is accurate. And actually, this is on the CAR website. There are some questions that tells you which type of real estate transaction are required NHD reports. I believe there's been a lot of speakers on it lately. I've heard a few. So those of you who are going to the CAR website, I strongly encourage you to download the form and save it on your desktop as a PDF so that you can reference back to it.
Mr. John Wax, what properties for sale require an NHD report?
Natural hazard disclosure reports are required in some form on all sale of real property in California. Residential, 1 to 4 units, condos, co-ops, mobile homes, commercial industrial properties, as well as vacant land. Any sale of real property is required to have a natural hazard disclosure. The 1 to 4 units have to have a tax report, and environmental reports are recommended, and we'll get into that a little bit later. And remember that you are responsible for selecting the company to use to provide these reports.
Mr. Eric Spitz, are environmental reports required, and when should I order an environmental report?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Eric Spitz from my NHD. Environmental reports, even though they're on the CAR form now, are not required by law. And as you know, and I'm a firm believer of sticking to what's required by law. I would order an environmental report, because an environmental report, of course, we have the natural hazards that talk about natural hazards in the natural hazard disclosure report. The environmental report talks about some environmental issues, leaky tanks, leaky waste tanks, gas station locations, things like that are not natural hazards. I would recommend an environmental report being ordered if it's vacant land or if someone's planning on doing some sort of development on a property so they can really learn what's around the property, because it may limit what sort of development they can do. So vacant land, as far as getting a report, would be a good idea. You know, for a regular report, I don't really recommend it. Not required by law, stick to what's required by law.
Oriana, can I add to that?
Yes.
I like to solidify what Eric said regarding obeying the law. There is something I want to read from you from the city of Arcadia regarding the environmental portion of the report, and why I strongly encourage to get one, only because of this thing that Eric had said. If a homeowner is going to be doing any type of renovations, upgrades, or those things to his property, he is going to be going where to get his permits? The city, right? State doesn't give permits. The city does. So in order for your buyer to make sure that his dream home is a dream home that he can turn into what he wants to do, he really must do this due diligence. And I strongly encourage it, only because if they're in a liquefaction area, if they're in an expansive soil area where they may have to do soil testing, if there is a natural transmission pipeline behind their property lines, all these things can prevent the buyer from going forward with his dream home. And the city of Arcadia, this is actually on their website. It's the safety element from the general plan, which I will read at the moment. A seller of a real estate or his agent shall disclose in writing to any prospective buyer the fact that the property is located within a special study zones to be signed by the purchaser prior to entering escrow. So when we recommend getting your NHD report, best practices, get it prior to entering into escrow, so maybe at the listing. Okay? Thank you.
And I have one other thing to add, okay? We're not in Missouri, the show me state. We're in California, the sue me state. So you guys should always get the environmental report, and here's a good reason. Who does business in Alhambra? Alhambra has an Area 3 Superfund site located on the national priorities list at Main Street and Garfield Avenue, which means that there had been or there is a potential risk to human life. So get the environmental.
You know, I'm sorry, I have a different philosophy about that. You know, I kind of stick to what California requires by law. I stick to what California Association of Realtors requires by law. As a matter of fact, my NHD is a partner with the California Association of Realtors. You know, Maria had brought up the gas pipeline disclosure. The gas pipeline disclosure is in all of our environmental reports. It talks about the distance from the property where that gas pipeline disclosure. But California law and the California Association of Realtors came out with the official language, the official disclosure that you're required by law to do. And it's in everybody's standard natural hazard disclosure report. And that's what people do, is stick to what's required. You know, we often talk about environmental reports, and you better order an environmental report. You know, make no two things about it. You know, there's more money for us if you order an environmental report, right? More money in commissions, more money to the company as well. But I strongly recommend doing the right thing and sticking to what's required by law. In the environmental report, you know, it's not required. And where would you stop? If you're ordering an environmental report, why don't you go to a phase 1? Do it better and really find out what's underneath that ground there at the property.
You know, I believe in your SPQ, the seller's property questionnaire, on letter K, that is a question that a seller must answer if he's near a transmission pipeline within 2,000 feet. Seller isn't going to know that. They're not even going to remember any of the letters that they get from any company, because where do they go? In the trash can. So I still encourage you to do that. I disagree with the part about the money factor. You know very well as realtors, they're going to come back to you and sue you, right? The difference of an NHD report on environmental, what, $30, when your retainer fee can be up to, what, $5,000 with an attorney? I don't know about you, but I don't have that kind of money to hold with a litigator to be protecting me and defending me on something that I could have just taken care of at the very beginning and making it simple. So that's my point of view.
And one last statement. CAR would not have changed the form to say environmental and tax and have you check it off. That's CAR just getting ready to make changes.
That's right. Good
Okay,
point.
second question.
Thank you.
Is it important to report on all 3 levels, city, county, and state? And what's the difference? That's for Maria, sorry.
There are differences. Most people ask, well, isn't the state sufficient? State is the mandate requirement per our judicial system here in California. However, county and city local determinations are different. Again, we go back to the safety element from the general plan. They are going to determine whether a buyer can do the renovations to their property. We disclose on all 3. I have a list here, and where all the cities have different zones that they are actually have fire, a flood, some places more than others. So when you're going for permits, when you're going to get sued on, it's usually on the local level, not on a state level. So those are the reasons why I really recommend to make sure that your NHD report is disclosing on all 3.
Yeah, I can add to that a little. That is correct. And I think most of the natural hazard companies, at least the 3 that are up here, do disclose the city, county level disclosures as well. But as Maria said, and to that point, there are many different disclosures that the state puts on you about earthquake fault zones and fire zones and landslide zones. And the city and county level have their own geo teams, and they have their own disclosures as far as fire zones and dam inundation zones. So they are different, yet important. And all three companies here make those disclosures for you.
One thing I do want to let you know, when the courts look to the state and the city-county information, they rule with the local city-county information if there's a difference. So make sure you do use a company that does have state, county, and city information so that you're protected and you're providing all information, because surprises cause lawsuits and you want to make sure they're fully informed.
I think the rule of thumb is the most stringent requirement, the most stringent zone will apply. That's the way the cities look at it.
Okay, John, question number 2. Why must you disclose completely the Melrose and the 1915 bonds information?
The reason why you want to have all the information, and there are specifics for that, you have to give them facility, purpose, beginning and any date, amount of the tax, amount of the maximum tax, and escalator for Melrose and 1915 bond similarly, except there is no escalator and there's no maximum tax. Because you can't just say, yes, it's in, or no, it's not. Because a 1915 bond, there may not be any work done in that particular area. So it may be in the zone, but it may not hit the tax bill because no charges were charged on that property. So you want to make sure you have that information in there. The other thing I wanted to touch on is that they have senior lien authority. What does that mean? That means that if, say, for whatever reason, the property goes into distress or foreclosure, or they can institute foreclosure proceedings if they're not paid timely, and it's as soon as 90 days. That's what it means. And that they can go in, and just for like $15 fee, they can go ahead and institute foreclosure proceedings. More headache. If you don't know it's got to be paid, sure, it's in a title report, but it's not specified 1915 bond, it's not specified a Melrose where you have senior lien authority. The other thing I wanted to touch on, it wasn't in the questions, was the PACE Hero. They also have senior lien authority. What are they? They are the property assessed clean energy programs, which have for financing for approved energy efficiency for water, for solar panels, doors, and windows. And if they're not paid and the property goes into distress, they get paid first above the regular mortgage. And many of the federal programs like Fannie Mac and Freddie Mae will not lend on the properties. So what you have to do is find out through our information, as well as asking the seller certain questions like, is it financed or leased? How much is owed on it? Is it a PACE program? When was it installed? Certain things like that. And then what the buyout is, because sometimes you can't get new loans if there's an outstanding PACE Hero on the property. So I do want to let you know they're all over, and most of the new homes are putting on solar panels under a PACE Hero program. I had a person from Sears come out, and they said, hey, how about we get you a PACE loan for your new, to put in a new door? And I already knew about it, and I said, let me think about it, because I didn't want to move forward with that. Thank you.
Yeah, and John is correct about that regarding the solar panels. That's, again, another best practice that we encourage you to do. Most sellers aren't going to remember that they put on a Hero PACE type of loan or energy efficient because, again, they forget. The indebtedness is rolled into the property taxes, therefore they pay it on their, they pay it semi-annually. So they're not going to remember that direct assessment. So best practice, get that up front. This way you can get the forms, the agreement that they made, as to John alluded to, the time frame, what is owed. Believe it or not, there was a lawsuit in Moreno Valley last year. A homeowner actually sued, the buyer did, to the previous homeowner because she finally realized why her property taxes were so elevated. She had one of these loans, and the indebtedness was close to $20,000. That's not chump change. That's really important. I had another situation in South Pasadena. One of my realtors out there was very upset because they were in escrow and they found out they had one of these PACE loans on their property. And when they went to go order the demand face value was more paying through escrow. It was close to $12,000. It had doubled from the actual original indebtedness. Again, and that's something they had to struggle and fight for to get it down to close those. So best practice, get it at listing, avoid the hiccups, and so you can close your escrows more successfully.
Okay, Eric, is Melrose and 1950 bonds required to be disclosed?
Yeah, we just spoke of that, and I'll add to John's point on that. Melrose and 1915 bonds are required disclosures. And as John said earlier, if a Melrose or 1915 bond is not paid, it can trigger an accelerated foreclosure. And that's certainly what you want to avoid. Melrose was a way for the developer to help finance the sidewalks, the streets, the schools, the lights, and then put it on the future buyers of the tract. So you see that. Whereas the 1915 bonds are a way for the city to help finance as well. It can be streets, lights, but in this case, I don't know if you knew this, but every property in the county of Los Angeles has a 1915 bonds on it. And currently, it's a small amount going for the Parks and Recreation to help preserve the parks. But now, if you are in a high fire severity zone, they've added a 1915 bond for an additional $40 to help mitigate and push brush back. And so they're collecting fees on that. So it's another $40 there. But they are certainly required to be disclosed, absolutely required to be disclosed.
Eric, are you referring to the state responsibility area where it's up to $150?
I'm not referring to that. I'm referring to, I've seen $40 charges for the high fire zones as well. As John and Maria talked about the HERO program, we can touch on that a little. All of us have attended plenty of meetings about the HERO program. I don't know if there's a lot of that going on here yet, but there's certainly a ton of it going on in the Inland Empire. And of course, contractors are coming to homeowners and letting them know that they can put up a solar system on their roof, and it can be financed down the road, but it does end up being on the taxes. These are supposed to be low-interest loans, but the amount of the interest is currently somewhere between 6 and 8.5%, so it doesn't sound like so low interest. It does go on the tax bill. It does add to the debt of the property, so it does need to get paid back, and certainly can hold up a refi, a sale, and further, because we've also seen where people have to have the appraiser will walk in, and they have to account for that additional maybe $20,000 or $30,000 that needs to be paid off. And the average homeowner is in their property, 7 to 10 years, and yet they're paying a debt over the next 20 years. Is it really worthwhile? I've asked them, do they do some sort of study to really show the savings on this HERO program on a property? And these HERO companies will give no guarantee. They'll just say it's great for you, but they will give you no analysis and no guarantees as to whether it will work or not. And the high interest, so, I look at it as just another tax or another debt on the property. So currently, I'm not the largest fan of that.
Yeah, one other thing I'll add. FHA currently are setting up new guidelines to address these PACE HERO loans, basically on efficiency and repayment of the loans. So look for more information to come, but we will have that information in our tax report because they are paid back through the taxes.
And to add, it does show up in our tax report as well.
Same here.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Everybody.
Okay.
Otherwise, you
Question
got the
number
wrong
3. Maria, do I need an environmental report, and what's the purpose?
Well, I think you've heard us talk on environmental already a lot, and we've kind of all gave our point of view as to why we should get the environmental report. Again, it's out there, the information, it's material fact, it's on the Environmental Protection Agency website, Superfund sites are there, water contaminations, as John reported to in Alhambra, there is a Superfund site open presently. They're all over. A matter of fact, I'm going to go to my notes here, but bear with me. It's kind of challenging. I'm still recovering from my excursions on the trails, fracturing my arm. Just in the just in the county of Los Angeles, just so you'll know, LUS sites, there's 7,466. NPL sites, 29. The RCRA corrosion action sites, there's 51. The SLIC sites, there's 2,435. State responsibility sites, that's that extra tax fee that for a wild area where they don't have local, city, and county, they use the state forestry for their, like the brush and so forth. Oil and gas wells, those are those natural pipelines and stuff, there's 25,825. So you can see County of LA has a lot of stuff going on. Each city has its own regulations. One of the things I really encourage you to do is that if you're going to be working in an area, farming in an area, and you want to make that your hub and be the expert, I encourage you to take a tour down to the city. I actually did. I spoke with the planning department for the city of Arcadia, and I had an hour coffee. It was very interesting to see how they determine these local determinations on their cities, what they do, how they pull permits, how long they update. They change all of these every 15 years. They make updates, changes. Very, very interesting thing to do. So if you're going to be an expert in a city, be the expert. Know what affects your transaction, whether it's a fire, whether it's an earthquake fault line, liquefaction, landslides, hillsides, whatever it may be the expert. Okay? So again, thank you.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I was talking to a broker in this area, and she said, oh, I wish I had ordered that because there was a cleaners on one side, a gas station down the block, and both of them were leaking sites going directly to her property. It was a big mess. She didn't end up closing. There was lawsuits. Get the information. Do not wait. Be informed and inform the parties to the transaction. Surprises cause lawsuits.
I know there's been a lot of talk about lawsuits and everything, but we've never been sued. There's never been a loss to any party because of any error in any MyNHD or when I used to own LGS report. Just to add, so we don't.
I think
see
we're all the
lawsuits
same
a
up
whole
here.
lot, but-
Yeah, exactly the same.
Yeah.
Okay, question number 3 for John. How is the sale of a property affected when it's determined to be a hazard zone?
Well, that usually triggers additional money out of the buyer's pocket because insurances, if it's in a flood zone, if it's in a very high fire or fire zone or earthquake zone, all those things trigger additional money that the buyer would have to pay for insurances. The other thing is there are remedies for that. For the flood zones, I would recommend getting a flood elevation certificate, which elevates the property possibly out of the flood zone. They're done by land surveyors, and they usually cost between $350 to $850. But that's the remedy in order to help you alleviate how much you're going to pay for insurance and flood insurance purposes. And as far as the earthquake insurance, they're very expensive, and a lot of times you'll have to go to the state and go through their insurance program to get insurance that way. But it is very expensive, and if you're in near a fault zone or in a near a trace line, I would definitely get the insurance because what you're going to have once it happens, and if there's any part of your property that's damaged and you're on the trace line, you cannot replace or repair it. So that's another thing. So these are all things that can affect your property.
Talking about insurance a little bit, as John alluded to, I think it's more of a personal question, whether you have a lot of equity in the property or not, whether you really want to pay that much for insurance. I know, remember the Northridge quake, in '94. I live in Westwood, and I thought I was in the epicenter. So wherever that earthquake hits, we're all going to feel it. We all need to be prepared somehow, some way. But I think it's more of a personal question about your equity in the property, whether you really see it as a win-win for the earthquake insurance. If you have a lot of equity, you probably want to have some earthquake insurance. If you have no equity in the property, and it's a non-recourse loan, may not be a bad idea not to have earthquake insurance.
I'm not an expert on insurance, so definitely reach out to your insurance agents that you're working with. But I do want to piggyback off what John said regarding the flood insurance. This flood insurance can cost up to $4,000 to $6,000 per year if a property is zoned in a flood zone. That flood insurance is actually, that cost is a factor in the cost of the buyer. So if you have a buyer that's barely coming in, that can actually deteriorate them from getting their loan because it will put their debt ratio up. So you want to make sure that they're not in one. One of the things that First American does do is if a property is in a flood zone, which is the A and V zones, by the way, are the ones that your lenders will look at for additional flood insurance, we give a flood cert. Use that flood cert in your transaction. Now, if the actual structure is in the floodplain, what John was speaking about, the flood elevation, they're going to have to get one to determine how far underwater that actual house would be in the event of a flood. Now, I know we've been in a drought and we don't have a lot of rain. However, the flood zones are still there and they're still zoned regardless of the rain level. So be aware of those things. Again, best practices, get your NHD report at listing.
Yeah. As Maria said, we all do flood determinations, and actually we pull a flood cert whether it's in an AV or not. If a flood zone is touching a property, just touching it 1%, 5%, 10%, or 100%, we pull a flood cert, because the flood cert is, the national flood cert is the final determination of whether it is in a flood insurance area or not.
Okay, question number.
One last addition. If you work with a land surveyor who's a civil engineer, they can also apply for a revision, a map revision of the particular area. Example, this side of the street your property's in, it's in a flood zone. This side of the street is another property not in a flood zone. He can go out, assess the property, write a report, it's a little bit more, but take you out, and so you don't have to pay $1,200 to $5,000 for additional flood insurance.
Okay, Eric.
And you can't get a loan unless you have flood insurance, fire insurance, unless you're paying all cash.
I'm ready.
Okay, all right. Eric, how long is the report good for? And when should I update a disclosure report?
The report is good on the day it's produced. You never know what's going to change. Our policy is if someone wants it updated, we recommend within 6 months, if it hasn't closed and you're still using the same report, to update it. We're happy to help you out if you want it done in 3 months, 5 months, a year. We always update them all the time. But the report is actually good on the day it's produced, because you never know if the determinations or anything can change the following day. You know, we're in the state of California. Things don't change too much too fast, but it can change. And along that same lines, it's not our responsibility, and none of the companies here will start reaching out to everybody we've done a report for in the past, letting you know there has been a change. It's everything kind of going forward. So.
One last thing. I recommend 90 days because they can change within 6 months, and you don't know where you're falling within that. And it's for free. All our companies do it for free.
Okay, we're pressed for time, so I'm not going to
Okay.
ask the last questions. Do you have any questions for our panel?
We
Okay.
did a good job.
Yeah.
We talked,
Yes.
We
yes,
really
sir.
got 'em.
We have a question.
Who determines the flood zones?
FEMA.
Lived in Japan after the earthquake.
FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency.
200 feet of elevation
Yeah.
were wiped out.
It's the federal.
Federal Emergency Management Agency. Not only they, and not only do we get the data from them to make the determination on our reports, but when a property's getting a loan, the lender also pulls a flood cert too. So there's really a double checking there.
So if we had a 9-point earthquake and the San Gabriel Valley was flooded, all those people are not covered.
You know, they've determined where the flood zones fall. And we can talk a little bit about the geographic area of San Gabriel. You know, you've got, at the local level, your local city, county level has determined there are little slivers of earthquake faults, some in South Pasadena, some in San Gabriel, and South El Monte, where you're talking about the earthquake fault zones. There's a big, Alquist-Pirillo, the big earthquake fault zones, South Pass to San Marino, Pasadena to Monrovia, and there's one right here, Garvey and San Gabriel, around Garvey and San Gabriel, straight down to the 60 freeway. So, you know, be prepared. You know, we talked about the gas lines and where they are in relation to the house. I don't know if you knew this, but the city of LA has a program where every property before it can be sold has to have an automatic gas shutoff valve installed on the home. You know, and if the cities wanted, they could put one of these shutoff valves on every block if they wanted. Please.
The other thing is, I've had reports from all three of your companies, and none of you disclose in the San Gabriel Valley. We used to have airports all over here with military planes dumping ammunition in the ground.
There are,
I know for a fact, I grew up in one of those tracks. We used to dig in the yard and find ammunition.
there are disclosures on the report, and as far as a military zone or previous military zone, it's within 1 mile of the property. So if it was
Right.
within 1 mile of the property, it would come up,
Yeah.
it would come up on the national database.
I'll leave airport tracks and not show up.
And we also have the disclosure, of course, for FAA landing facilities within 2 miles of the property. And we will give you both public and private, the name of the airport as well as the distance from the property.
It doesn't show up in your report.
What's the, can you see me after, and then I'll write it down and write it on your card, and I'll take a look from our geo team?
Two of them, one's in Almani and one's in.
Put it on your card and give it to me, and I'll look it up for you, and I'll see where it shows up in our report, and I'll provide you some maps on that, okay? See what we can do.
Yeah, the requirement, to add on that,
Go ahead.
wait, to add on to that, the requirement is it's airport influence area
Yes.
and airport noise disclosure, like 65 decibels, which is like a rock band. Those are the things that are required. What he's talking about is the formerly used defense sites or military ordinance, and we are required to tell you within a mile if that property is located within that mile, plus those other disclosures. But as far as munitions being dropped, we don't have that information. It's not a requirement.
Yes, sir.
Will the lender ask for the report periodically, like the same lender or the new lender? Let's say anything changed for the price zone or whatever zone?
I'm sorry, repeat the question?
Will the lender ask for the report periodically, like 3 or 4 years, ask for a new report? Anything changed?
It's quite possible that something could change in the report. We don't know. Like we said earlier, the report's really good on the day it was produced. You know, 3 or 4 years later, maybe it's changed.
Chances
maybe it
are they
hasn't.
have.
You know, certainly the tax information is going to be different.
The tax information and the flood zones usually change.
Yeah.
So 6 months to a year.
Why are they asking to see this report 3 years later? Is it for a refi or something like that?
They don't have them for
Yeah,
refis.
Yeah, these are not required on refis.
No.
But what the lender will do on a refi is they will certainly pull a flood cert. They will do that automatically. They do it on every refi or transfer.
Okay, let's give our panelists a hand.
Yeah.
Thank you.